watching NotesIn9.
Hello, and welcome to NotesIn9. I'm David Leedy. Episode 189, Introduction to Sonarqube with a Side of Docker. Whoever has the biggest toolbox wins. Don't you know? Okay, before we get in the show, some really big news that just hit the wire today, and that is the wonderful user group MWLug has announced the dates for their next meeting, and it's going to be August 17 to 19 in Austin, Texas. Which is supposed to be a fabulous city. I personally am so excited. I cannot wait to be there. You're gonna probably see this spiel on the show many times in the future till it happens. But I am all in. I'm going to at least attempt to speak. I don't know if they'll have me or not, but I'm going to try. I'm going to try to sponsor maybe a keg of beer or something if the opportunity presents itself. It's just going to be a great time, and I can't wait. Austin's supposed to be a fabulous city. A lot of good people there. It's the home of some of the best barbecue in the world. I believe there will be beer as well at this place. And remember, this unlike IBM Connect or some of the other conferences, this is a very small fee typically to join. Now, I don't have any details other than this, but historically, I think it's been like a $50 or $75 donation or however they do that. And again, I don't know what it is going to be for this yet. As soon as the details are out, I'll let you know. But it's very affordable, is what I'm saying. You're not spending $1,500 for a ticket, and you're hearing some really great speakers and really great content. And quite honestly, again, I just hope I make the cut. And if not, I'll still be there in the first row, absorbing as much as I can. So I hope to see you there. If you have any questions, go to that website and keep your eye out for more news, or shoot me an email. If I can help you, I will. But it's going to be a great time, and you don't want to miss it. Speaking of great time, Mr. Great Time himself is back with us, and that's Eric McCormick. And he's an expert developer. How expert is he? His beard knows more about programming than I do. And that's, just saying just how he exudes excellence in programming. He's an IBM champion, of course, because just look at him. He looks like a champion developer, and quite honestly, a champion lumberjack. But that's okay. We love him anyway. He's also a customer like me. So that's always kind of fun to see. So someone not beholden to IBM, like he can just explore what he wants and come on the show. And he always brings us new and different things, which is one of the things that I really like about when he has time to come on. His Twitter is there's actually a way to pronounce it, and I don't know how to pronounce it. But there is a way to pronounce that on Twitter, and there's his blog and information. And today he's going to come on and talk about this thing called Sonarqube, which I looked at this video and I had no idea what it was. I'm like, oh, wow, that's kind of cool. It's kind of like a code review for the developer who doesn't have friends, which maybe that would be me. I'm not even sure. But I'm excited to try this. I think you might too, because it's always good to have a second pass look at your code where you can kind of learn from it. Because if you don't have other people or other systems looking at your code, how do you learn? And that is one of the reasons why we're all here, to learn to be better developers. So with all that being said, let's go to the demo.
I'm Eric McCormick, and I wanted to show everyone a quick way of getting started with something that was recently talked about quite heavily by Christian Gudeman at IBM Connect last week. Christian was raving pretty well about something called Sonarqube, and I found a pretty easy way, I'm not the first I'm sure, a fairly easy way of getting started up with it, at least for a local, kind of a development preview, at least on your local. It's also a good way of deploying for production, but it takes slightly more setup. And bottom line, it's using Docker, which you've probably heard of if you've not been living in a cave for the last year or two. Docker does a great job running images, and on top of them containers, ideally for applications, and they systematically present or expose volume connections and ports. So for administrative purposes, it's really cool stuff. It's also really easy and convenient, especially if you're a developer and you don't like to have to do anything manually. So long story short, I recommend you start off by downloading the Docker Toolbox for your recording distribution. If you're a Linux user, you won't have any of the front-end GUI side of things that I'll show here, but that's okay. If you're a Linux foo expert, you'll probably be able to figure it out from the command line, which I'll show you about a bit here. So we're talking about Docker. If we go to Docker Hub, we do a quick search for Sonarqube, Sonarqube, you'll see that here's the official image. This is what I'll be finding and looking up here in just a minute. And you can see there's the Docker file for the latest 5.3 version. There's also the LTS version. I think I wound up using the latest, but no worries. So long story short, if you're using Linux, here's the Docker command. So if you're on Windows or Mac, download your recording Docker Toolbox installer. Docker was talked about pretty recently too, last week at Connect by Matteo Bisi and Daniele Vistale, who did a lightning talk on containerizing your Domino server with Docker. And they had it running on an Ubuntu image, which I think is technically unsupported by IBM. Realistically, it's probably about as supported as it's going to get, but it works, and they demonstrated quite well 4 running instances simultaneously on their local, obviously just to kind of show what it can do. And it was a really cool lightning talk, I must say. So it definitely showed off the power of the platform. Also, the structure of the Domino server with a segregated program directory from data directory. It's basically a win-win, and it makes it even easier for someone to, say, try upgrading the server, installing a fix pack. If they run into trouble, put a halt to it, roll back, do what they need to do. So it was really neat to see. And they put their Docker files, which none of these are binaries or anything. Obviously, you have to be licensed accordingly. But they have their setup Docker file, their Ubuntu Docker file, and also they showed how you can hook into and say, hey, make sure I run this fix pack install as I'm running my setup routine. So their slides are out there. It's really worth looking into, especially if you're just at least curious, because it's got great repercussions. So once you have your Docker tools installed, there's a GUI called Kitematic. On Mac, it shows itself as being in beta. On Windows, it shows itself as an alpha. It was a separate project originally from some Docker enthusiasts. It then got merged into Docker's core. So while they catch up with some of the code status and unification and whatnot, it's still kind of ongoing. Now you can see mine's already started up here. If you have nothing, like I did, you go here, Sonarqube, and you can see here's the official one. It's been downloaded so many times, liked so many times. Also a link to the Docker Hub page, and it shows it's the latest. So hit create, and it'll start the process. So part of Docker's execution protocol is to run on top of base images, regardless of the containerized app. And that's pretty powerful because it makes scaling for something like a platform as a service a lot cooler. But from a use standpoint, you don't have to keep that in your mind or anything. So long story short, I set mine up, I installed a couple plugins, I ran one app at it and realized this is really cool stuff. I can do this quickly, why not share it? So mine's running. You can see here from the home tab for this container, I'm running the equivalent of the inside. It calls itself port 9000. It's actually this port at this IP to my local address, and these volumes are mounted. If you go into settings, you can see some of the environment variables that it uses, the port configurations. You can change things around, volume definitions and where they mount on your local, that kind of a thing. So it's pretty powerful, and I like the GUI if nothing else for that. Here it attempts to do a preview, and if there's a registered graphical interface, this one you just go to the IP. Sometimes it shows up with a open web preview or whatever, and that'll take you there. I'll get there in a second. This is Sonarqube's homepage. It's open source. Some of the plugins do require licensing, some of the more specific ones. I'm going to focus on Java and JavaScript for the demo application I'm talking about. Those are perfectly open source and free to use. But if you're going to do something like RPG, which is an available plugin, by the way, I was surprised, as is COBOL, those apparently require licensing to run on your Sonarqube server. So once you go to the download page, there's a download for the servers and all that. There's the LTS and the current version. I'm using the current. I'm not sure that really matters. And separately down here, you'll take note, the scanners. The scanners are what actually perform the scanning on the local environment. And then it pushes that resulting set over to the actual Sonarqube server. So basically, after some breaking change in the documentation, anything you could find on how on earth do I get started up with this points at this one document called Analyzing Source Code. It took me about 5 times, and I read everything up to about here. And I assumed that all the stuff down here, which when I first looked and scanned the page, I assumed was just footer information, additional links. But running analyses, you have to realize that you need an actual scanner separate from the server. And they have one for Jenkins, MS Build for .NET, Gradle, Maven, Ant, and this regular one. That's the one I have installed. Now, all these other ones, including Ant or Maven and Gradle, I'm sure I'll get into, especially the one for Jenkins. And it's great to see that they're there. I can also tell you that there are unofficial NPM packages out there for Gulp and Grunt, which is pretty hot in my opinion. So if you can add it into your existing build, all the better. But this top one, the Sonarqube scanner here, takes you to this page, big old box at the top, 2.5, compatible with the LTS on up. Hit the download, run the install, and then it talks here about having this. Well, if it's already installed somewhere, then you're good to go. You can install the scanner technically without. You just won't be able to push any results anywhere. It creates it's a zip file that gives you a directory, and you got to park that somewhere. And then you have to add 2 things. In the config there, you'll have to put in the properties file, the sonar.host.url equal to HTTP, your IP, and your port. So here, this is really important. Now once you've done that, you go ahead and save that file, and then there's only one little piece left before you can scan code, and that's to create a properties file according to their spec in your project directory. So I'm going to show you guys that real quick. Here's my home page. Here's my first go at it. I just copied some dummy, overly simple properties file from the boilerplate, and that's why it has the word my in front of it. Not to worry. I'll show you that real quick. So a property file we just looked at. So if you need code to scan, per usual, you can scan my stuff and find out all the things that it thinks are pretty horrific. And it's going to sound pretty strong, but I'll point out something here in a moment and we can see how that goes. So here I have a copy of my project. If you're familiar with it, it's got the OnDisk project. It's got my my source for my client-side assets, and basically I'm going to point it at the Java classes and the source JavaScript classes. So I do that with this Sonar project properties file, and you can see it follows the same path. I have a project key, which has to be a unique key for each namespace of the project on the Sonarqube server. Then I give it a name. I use the same one. Product version is whatever. And this is in my GitHub repository now, in case you're curious. So for sources, I'm pointing at my Java classes from ODP code Java, and then the specific path here. So in my ODP, you'll see I have other Java classes, but those are the ones that I care about as far as code content, because if I screw up my services file, well, that's on me. Jesse's class that I extend, no worries, and I've got those couple of older copies of the OpenNTF Domino API, which I'm working on upgrading to the proper current 2.0 version. So this is what I care about in conjunction with my source JavaScript files. So I specify those for my sonar.sources, and then down here I have the encoding, and there's additional stuff you can do. If you have unit tests, you can point where your test folder for test scripts, and then also your actual your coverage reports are, that kind of a thing. But this is the simplistic version to get started with. So once that's all done, you run sonar runner, and it'll do the following. Wait, I need to make sure my IP is updated. This is the downside of running it out of Docker. If you're using the GUI like this, you can change the IP or the port occasionally. My port changes every time I restart this one, but you have to restart it to install plugins. So Sonarqube, if the default login is admin, if you go to the administration system update center, it comes with a couple. You can install a couple like I did. I installed a couple more than I had originally. So you can see there's like C#, there's CSS, even check styles. And some of these have these checkboxes, and these are the ones that relate back to licensing, I believe. So Developer Cockpit, I'm pretty sure I have to actually pay money or something for, and you can go find the home page, and it talks about, pricing and all that. So I'm trying to stick to the free stuff because that's what's useful to me at the moment. So if I go back here, you'll see I got the one project. Now I'm going to update my config file 8.2. You can see it incremented to 8.3 already. So now that that's done, the global property for my scanner knows where to put its stuff when it's done. So I'm going to go ahead and hit run. Builds up some cache. There's technically a hidden directory of .sonar in your current working directory that it creates and works from in order to push. If you're working with a Git project, I recommend putting .sonar in your git ignore. You can see success, and there we are. So now if I refresh this, you can see my project came in. You can also see there's a quick comparison on code size. So this is a 1600 line, at least for the code that I pointed it at, versus the other one, which is about 1000. And this whole interface is rather dashboard driven. So you can either click on the individual project up here, or you can look at this widget. And if I click there, it'll show me my source.js versus the servlets versus the app versus model, controller, and factory. And usually with these widgets, these card-based widgets, there's a home icon. But I'm going to go ahead and go in here. You can see a couple of scary things. It says there are 357 issues, 23 duplicated blocks, and 4 days of debt, which sounds scary as all sin. Now I can tell you, though, that I believe my code to be relatively well organized. So some of the stuff, as Jesse kind of pointed out on Twitter, can seem kind of stylistic when it comes to code quality. And for the most part, I was thinking that until I did some more checking into the actual issues it was finding. So of note, I'm still getting flagged green A. So while Sonarqube is telling me I have stuff I can fix, it's kind of more like there's warnings, and there are different thresholds you can set, as Christian pointed out in his continuous delivery session last week. So if I go into A, this is actually taking me to the rating dashboard inside the project. You can see my controller apparently does not like, and the other ones it gives a B, but on the whole it's giving me an A. So I'm guessing it doesn't think I'm too bad. I can get into a lot of specifics. For example, if I go back and then go into controller, which is relatively lightweight, you can see it's giving me a C up here. If I come down here, it really doesn't like my public constructor with no content. So a public constructor doing nothing, it says I should hide. Additionally, it says comment explaining why this method is empty. If it's intentional, it says it's a good idea to put here. Otherwise, it should do something else. So if I hit this little mark, it comes up with an explanation, and this is reasoning behind it. And so it also tags different things. So suspicious is the one here. There's a pretty funny one that I saw on my other project I might point out here in just a minute. But it tries to give reasoning at least, which is good. Now there was something else I wanted to show you. If I go back here, this is the home of the project. If I go into components, I go to, say, these guys. I go to the house record. So, for example, I'm not using constructor on this. I'm using it. And so it thinks that I should at least create a private one. I'm going to have nothing. That way I can't confuse it, which is interesting. It's not in this file. So, interesting thing of note. Here's one I didn't really think would be a big deal. So I'm doing an equals check against get, which it thought I should use it on the left of the comparison, which, okay, interesting. So it tags it as bad practice, but apparently if you come down here and read through the description, any equals or equals ignore case, it recommends putting the comparative case on the left so that it cannot possibly call a null pointer, which is an interesting thing because that seems kind of important. So you potentially would have less issues in how a method executes. And so it gives a couple examples here of non-compliant or potentially NPEs, and then it shows what it regards as a proper example. So I never would have thought of that myself offhand, and obviously everyone just kind of codes according to their normal use case. This is kind of like the poor man's code review. So if you have no peer review, it's able to at least give you something that you can say, damn the torpedoes in full speed ahead, but it's kind of on you. So it's definitely interesting. If I get out of here, I'll show you the other one real quick. If I go back up to my main, to the other project, this is my NPM package I wrote recently, which is a really neat experience. It's a lot smaller code base, so it's finding a lot less. This one is fun. If I go in here, you'll see it's complaining about function as complexity of whatever it ranks, and its threshold is set to 10. Now, that's kind of curious, and this tag, brain overload, I thought was quite amusing, but it actually is pretty relevant. If I go into components, if I go into the main, so there's a module exports, which basically provides what on earth, when you call this file, it's supposed to do. It's something Node does. And what it's talking about is the complexity of this function it believes is so large by comparison, by its threshold, that it is difficult to follow. So a human being walking into it the first time would have difficulty following a function, a single function, which has this much stuff in it with that much complexity. You can see them defining different commands for the command line interface. But long story short, brain overload, how can you fathom that? You can't just take a look at it and know what it does. It's attempting to tell me that, hey, you might want to split this apart. So really neat, really cool thing. And it was surprisingly easy to set up. Of note, the out-of-the-box built-in database is not meant to be used. There's a lot of computations that go on in scanning. So really what they want you to do with the data is actually point it out towards something like PostgreSQL or another RDBMS, MySQL maybe, and at least give it a little break. But for just running a quick assessment of your own code before you get ready to plug something like this into your continuous deployment or continuous integration process, it's definitely a nifty tool. So check it out. Hope you like it. And I promise I'll record my highlights from my session from last week before too long.
And that's the demo. I thank Eric for coming on, and I might even have another show for him coming up relatively soon. And with that being said, here's my contact information, and I thank you for your time.